Thank you very much, Mrs. Anderson. Good morning to you. The issue of the regional spatial strategy for the South West is an issue of prime importance to not only my constituents, but the constituents of many honourable members here today, who I suspect were brought here by the title rather than the prospect of my oratory. Though I'm open to correction on that point. But Mrs. Anderson, we stood in this very chamber in January discussing the draft regional spatial strategy for the South West. And the previous but one housing minister stood up and assured us that the Secretary of State's comments on the panel's report would be available in the spring. So we fully anticipated perhaps something around Easter and then 3 months of rigorous parliamentary scrutiny of this fundamentally important and very detailed document. But the weeks and months went by and spring turned out to be the 22nd of July. In other words, the conclusions of the Secretary of State were issued to us on the final day that the House sat, and a 13-week consultation period commenced with 11 weeks of parliamentary recess. Mrs. Anderson, I put it to you that this is not respect for the parliamentary process. This debate today could be the only opportunity that all honourable members from the South West get to express their views in Parliament on the regional spatial strategy. And whilst many of these issues are matters for our colleagues in local government, clearly there are issues of regional and national strategic importance which we, as representatives of our communities, should be able to speak our minds about. And the government has made that exceptionally difficult for us. Were it not for the generosity of Mr. Speaker, we wouldn't even be having this debate today. This is totally unacceptable. This sums up the problem with the regional spatial strategy, which is it is incredibly top-down. The Department for Communities and Local Government produced a report earlier in this year, and it was called, please don't laugh, Communities in Control, Real People, Real Power. Now, if we'd read that title out at any of the 5 public meetings I've had in my constituency on this issue, there would have been a hollow laugh, because there is no sense that there is real people having real power in this process. It is an entirely top-down process. Now, there is a consultation. We are approaching the end of it. And to respond on the official form, in the official language, you can go to the website. And I've been encouraging many of my constituents to go to the website and to say what they think. And this is what one of them said. I thought you'd like to know about the difficulties I've experienced registering on the GOSWA website today and trying to download the documents. At every stage I've received error message. I've only succeeded in registering through sheer persistence, although I have so far failed to actually record any comments. I will keep trying. If I were a conspiracy theorist, ... Now, a second constituent said this: I've tried to object to the proposals as I feel very strongly about it, but by logging onto the system, it won't allow me to get onto that area without registering. This I have tried to do, and it won't work, so I can't object. Now, I don't suppose for a second this is deliberate, but it is exceptionally difficult to use the online process. I have registered myself this morning. I've had a look online, and I've managed to register, but I think the whole barriers to people registering their comments are enormous, and that's part of the problem. And it's not just the technology. Another constituent said this: I'm emailing you, Mr. Webb, to say I'm afraid I have failed hopelessly to respond online to the government's documents. As an ordinary council taxpayer and person, I have found the website almost impossible to comprehend and navigate, and I feel if the government was serious in intending to consult with the electorate, it should ensure that the means to do so were easily understood and accomplished by us all. Now, this is an extremely sophisticated constituent of mine who gives me very erudite comments on policy issues, who've just given up because the process is too difficult. So how valid is this consultation going to be? Now, I have had a look on the website this morning to see how many people have commented on what I call my area, which is known poetically as Housing Market Area 1. Used to be called Avon, it's now the West of England. And a grand total, out of a population of over 1 million people, a grand total of 18 people have registered their comments, the most recent of which was on the 25th of September. So one of my constituents, Ron Morton, who chairs the Shortwood Greenbelt campaign, rang the Government Office of the South West and said, why are there no more comments since the 25th of September? He was told, and I quote, that the official consultation website is not currently being updated with participant submissions because, and I quote, Gary is on holiday. And he's asked me to put to the Minister the following comment. Can the Minister, and there's a serious point here, can the Minister extend the consultation period, this time by a period at least equal to Gary's holiday? Because, given the crucial time of Gary's absence, the backlog of comments on his return is likely to be substantial. Now, the point here is you could have a process where nobody saw anybody's comments, but we don't have that. We have a process where you can see what people have said, but you can't because they haven't been updated for weeks. So either do it properly or don't do it at all, but don't faff around. And it's been described as a Whitehall farce, this entire process, and I have to agree. If we want people to respond, make it easy, make it doable, instead of putting all these barriers in their way. Yes, of course.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. I agree with everything he said. Would he also add, though, that people are not entirely sure what they're being consulted about? Is it the original proposals? Is it the panel recommendations? Is it what the Secretary of State has said? Yeah. I've spoken to very senior people who are involved in this process, and I can assure him that they don't know what is going on.
Yeah. I think the Honourable Gentleman raises a very important point, and if I can give an example of that from my own constituency, the draft RSS that came from the Regional Assembly had no specific proposals at all for the Yate and Chipping Sodbury area. The panel said 5,000 houses in that area, and Yate Town Council asked to give evidence to the panel and were refused. But at the end of the process, a big proposal was made for their area on which they couldn't feed in because they didn't know it was coming. And we can't comment on that because when we had debates in January, and the Honourable Gentleman had debates subsequently, I believe, it was told by this Minister that the Minister couldn't respond at that point in about spring because it was, it was quasi-judicial, so he couldn't comment. So he couldn't comment on the panel. Now we've got the revisions, and in the Yate case, that's now 3,000, not 5,000. So do we agree that 5,000 down to 3 is good news? Or do we say 3 is wrong because the panel were wrong, but are we allowed to comment on that because we're commenting on the proposed changes, not the number they first thought of? It's a complete farce, and nobody knows what the answer to that question is. There is... Yes, of course.
Can I just congratulate him on a very powerful and amusing and interesting speech, which we're looking forward to hearing more of, and I won't take up too much of his time. Has he any idea what the cost to the taxpayer is of this farce? And shouldn't the government come clean with the country and say they're going to abandon this whole regional spatial strategy? And I'm not sure if the spatial strategy is on planet Earth or is somewhere else in the stratosphere.
Yes, it's more a sort of outer spatial strategy, I suppose you might say. I mean, in terms of... I don't have a problem with thinking strategically at a regional level, provided it's a democratic process that engages people and starts with local communities, rather than being imposed from on high. That, I think, is my principal objection. But it needs to be regional, not national. And what has the government done between the panel report and the Secretary of State's versions? It's stripped out some of the bits that make it different. So the South West wanted to go further and faster on renewable energy, taken out. The South West wanted to go further and faster on sustainable building, taken out. Now, is this a regional strategy, or is it a national strategy imposed on a region? The Regional Assembly put it like this: regional distinctiveness should be one of the hallmarks of a regional spatial strategy. Statement of blindingly obvious, you'd think, wouldn't you? And its policy should reflect the regionally unique circumstances and aspirations in each region, not merely repeat national policy. So I hope the Minister can respond to us and explain why it is that this document has had some of the regional distinctiveness taken out of it. What's the point of asking the region to come up with a document and then saying, oh, sorry, you can't do different things in your region to other regions? It doesn't make sense. Yes, of course.
Does the Honourable Gentleman agree with me that it raises fundamental questions about what the government's definition of consultation is? Whether it's simply an evidence-gathering session which can be ignored if it goes counter to their views, or is it actually genuinely a process where the views of more local areas can actually feed into shaping the overall process?
My honourable friend's absolutely right. We've held 5 public meetings in my constituency about this, 700 plus people coming to them, and at the start of every one I've had to say, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is a waste of time responding to a consultation because nobody's listening. I hope today the Minister will assure us that the comments we make today, the comments that go on the website, actually have a chance of changing something. Because if he's simply come with his 3 million or whatever the number is and has told us all to just get on with it, then I do wonder whether we can change things. But frankly, if we all give up, that's a recipe for cynicism. That's why I've been determined to fight this. Now, Mrs. Anderson, I want to focus specifically on the issue of housing numbers. Obviously, this document covers much more, but that's the principal concern. And I looked at what the previous but one housing minister said when she responded to the debate in January. And essentially, if I were to summarise her 10-minute speech, it was, you're all a bunch of NIMBYs, go away. That was essentially the line that she took, and that may be in the Minister's draft. So if I can suggest a slightly more refined version of that position. We are not saying, or I am not saying, no to more houses. South Gloucestershire is not an area of NIMBYs. South Gloucestershire is an area which has taken 27,000 extra houses in the last 20 years, including the biggest housing estate in the whole of Europe, Bradley Stoke. We are now being asked for another 4 Bradley Stokes, a new unit of currency, another 4 of these estates on top of what we've already had. Now, in 2006, the then all-party cabinet of South Gloucestershire Council sat down and said, what do we need? What can we cope with? What's sustainable? What will the infrastructure bear? And they came up with a number, and their number was 21,000 for the next 20 years. It wasn't naught. It wasn't denying the need for affordable housing, and if the minister's officials have been busy, they'll have realised that twice in this chamber I have stood up demanding more affordable housing for local need in South Gloucestershire. So it's not no to new houses. It's sustainable houses, affordable houses for local need. But what's proposed is going way beyond that. South Gloucestershire said 21,000 on top of the 27,000 in the previous 20 years. The draft regional spatial strategy that the Assembly came up with said 23,000, which encroached on the green belt and we objected to, but was in the same ballpark. The panel said 30,800, and the Secretary of State said 32,800. So that's half as many again. And it's that margin between what the local people thought was sustainable and met local need, and this vast extra development. I give way so much.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and I congratulate him on getting this very important debate. Can I reassure him that the point he's making about his constituents not being NIMBYs is one which he will find echoed on the other side of Bristol in my own area of North Somerset? And I see the Honourable Member, my parliamentary neighbour for Woodspring in his seat as well. I'm sure he will make the same point. Nobody locally is making an argument for no extra houses. The problem is that those houses which are being foisted upon us are above what is sustainable, are above what local people will sign up to, and are far, far, far in advance of what local infrastructure, local transport and local community services will stand.
I think that's exactly right. And people say to me, where have all these houses come from? Where does the need come from? And when you look at the report, the need is not just for local people, it's for a massive influx, principally from the rest of the United Kingdom. It's not principally about immigration from outside the United Kingdom, it's overwhelmingly in-migration from the rest of the country. Because in parts of the country they're demolishing housing because nobody wants to live in those estates. And in our area, they're trying to cram as many, they see a field and they think a housing estate. That's the state of the unbalanced economic growth we've got in the country. And people sometimes say to me, well, where do you think the jobs should go and the houses should go? Well, I certainly think perhaps 21,000 should go in South Gloucestershire. But where is this excess? If the economy wasn't so unbalanced, if the United Kingdom wasn't like a big seesaw tilting towards the bottom, then we might have a more measured housing policy. It's trying to cram extra people in. It's not about local need. It feels like predict and provide, just like the roads, just like the airports. We've had more houses, we've had more jobs. Let's have more houses and more jobs and more houses and more jobs. 2026, another 20,000 for the next 20 years? Is there any limit? And have we perhaps reached it when we hit another 21,000? Now, I want to focus on 2 or 3 specific issues, and then I know many honourable members want to get in. The first is the issue of the green belt. Now, last year, the Prime Minister said something very reassuring, honestly. He said that he would, and I quote, robustly defend the green belt. And I think we all sleep better in our nights, in our beds at night, for knowing that the Prime Minister is going to robustly defend the green belt. And sure enough, on page 75 of this document, we read that the general extent of the Bristol and Bath green belt will be maintained. And we feel greatly reassured by that until you read the next sentence, which says, subject to the following alterations. Removal of the green belt to accommodate urban extensions at areas of search 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, 1F and 1G. And the only reason 1E isn't on the list is because it wasn't in the green belt to begin with. So the green belt will be kept except where it gets in our way. The green belt is fine except we want to get rid of it. Now, what so many of my constituents have said to me is the green belt is vital, especially in areas that have seen rapid development and urbanisation. Once that principle is breached, the area will never be the same again. It's vital for quality of life, for mental, physical and spiritual well-being, not just of people who live in the country, but actually particularly for people who live in the towns and the cities. This isn't about country dwellers throwing up the barriers and saying, you know, leave our green space alone. People who live in Bristol want the Bristol green belt kept. It's not just people who live in the countryside. And communities like the village of Shortwood in my constituency, which is in the green belt, will simply be wiped off the map by a sprawling housing estate if this goes ahead. And in fact, I discovered this morning, because in a document of this volume, there's always another bit to discover, that the housing density for what are these called urban extensions, which are actually what we call fields, but the housing density is 50 dwellings per hectare in the urban extensions, which means going that way, not just going that way. Now, obviously, there's a trade-off. You don't just have to, completely cover all the fields. But what it means is it's going to be high-density housing going up, which is going to have an even more conspicuous impact on the landscape, specifically in these kind of greenbelt areas. So the greenbelt is a fundamental issue of principle. And can I ask the Minister a key question of which I have given him advance notice, which is to say, if any of our local authorities zones all of these areas for housing as they'll be expected to do, can the developers then come along and say, right, you've created space for 32,000 houses, the first house we build will be on the prime bit of greenbelt we've never been allowed to touch before? Or will the local authority be able to say, no, hang on a minute, there's lots of other brownfield sites, urban areas that you should do first? I hope the Minister can reassure us at the least that once these areas are zoned, I'll give you in a second, once these areas are zoned, the local authority won't just lose on appeal if it says no to a greenbelt development because of failure to apply a sequential approach.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising this really important issue, but is he aware that in the examination in public, the panel's report said of brownfield and greenfield sites that they were two separate but complementary streams of supply which should not be sequentially phased? And what he's asking the Minister, and I suspect many other honourable members want, is to allow local authorities the power to have them sequentially phased.
Absolutely. There is no doubt that, if there's going to be any semblance of local democracy left in this process, local authorities ought to be able to prioritise sites. That's not no to housing, it's saying local people who actually know the local area the best should be able to say, that's a less damaging site, take that one first before the more damaging site. That's absolutely fundamental. And just finally on the Greenbelt, the PPG2, which is guidance to local authorities, says once the general extent of a greenbelt has been approved, it should be altered only in exceptional circumstances. If such an alteration is proposed, this is the case by a local authority, the Secretary of State will wish to be satisfied that the authority has considered opportunities for development within urban areas contained by and beyond the greenbelt. So if a council wants to undermine the greenbelt, it has to satisfy the Secretary of State that it's exceptional. Can I ask the Secretary of State, through the Minister, can she satisfy us that this is exceptional? That there are exceptional circumstances for eroding our greenbelt, because I haven't seen them demonstrated yet. Now, the second key issue, which again many honourable members will want to chip in on, is infrastructure. In other words, Area Search 1C, as it's poetically known, which is to the east of Bristol in my constituency, is a greenbelt issue. Area Search 1E, the area around Yate and Chipping Sodbury, is about infrastructure. Originally no specific houses, then 5,000 in the panel, now 3,000. It feels like, I don't know, who wants to be a millionaire? I don't want to give you that. Numbers coming from nowhere, it seems, and just an extra 5,000 houses. Now, in those communities, we have congested roads, infrequent train services, people being left on platforms because they can't all cram on the trains. Now, imagine you put these extra houses in. There is land for the houses. Nobody's saying that there isn't somewhere to put them. You could fit these houses in. But we're talking about an area with high levels of car ownership, high levels of commuting into central Bristol and the area. Now, the previous version of the regional spatial strategy had specific infrastructure projects in. They've been taken out. All we've got left is wishful thinking about improving the public transport infrastructure. So take the trains. We have a train station. Yeah, sure.
I thank my humble friend for giving way. Would you agree with me that at the moment, on the M4, M5 interchange, on the junction with the M32 and the A38 in the morning peak, we already have a gridlock by people trying to come out to Bristol to work in the employment areas in Aztec West and Bradley Stoke, and people from South Gloucestershire and Bath and North East Somerset trying to get into the city of Bristol. And this is simply going to make matters worse.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. It's already incredibly congested. Now, the Minister's response, I'm sure, will be, well, we'll improve public transport, or somebody will improve public transport. So I've asked the train company, suppose you could put on extra trains in the morning, and they're a bit iffy about whether they could fit them in, but I said, suppose you could double the morning peak journey from Yate into Bristol. How many people could you actually get into Bristol? 140, they said. 3,000 houses, 140 people. So the other nearly 3,000 people who will be commuting probably, although there will be some jobs in the area, but a lot of them will still be commuting, they ain't going to get on the trains. The buses are infrequent, expensive. Of course you can do more, but the question is, Has anybody really done the math, as the Americans would say, to match these two up? It's not good enough to say 3,000 houses and we'll improve the public transport. You know, the roads out of Yate can't be widened without knocking down all these houses. You know, it's not that just if you were determined enough you could do it. There isn't physical room. And who is going to say no? And who is going to listen when we say no? So infrastructure is critical. Yes, sure.
On the points that he's been running through around capacity design and infrastructure, also a lesson in the need to move away from a state-by-estate, developer-led investment, which provides knock-em-up houses, but not the workspaces, the community infrastructure that actually creates a living, working community. And don't we need to move to an involvement between the investors and the councils to shape communities that work, so that you don't have everybody commuting out into Bristol, that you actually have a place that people live in and works as a community, and that are part of the problem with the RSS is that it doesn't actually deliver a solution to how to shape communities that work.
Well, I very much echo the need for communities that work and pay tribute to my honourable friend's work on the rural housing issue. My worry is that even if you zone land for employment in the middle of Yate, you can't make people live next to where they work. People will be coming in, people will be going out, and we can't control that, and that's life, and that will always happen. And my worry is that we've already, as my honourable friend says, got gridlock. It's simply going to get worse, and wishing that the public transport was better, even if the money was there, if it was physically possible to do, would be a bonus. Yes, of course.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. Actually, isn't he making precisely the point that one of the motivations for the extra housing development is that it is near to existing transport infrastructure? So Taunton, for example, is envisaged for massive expansion. I echo the point made by the honourable member for Weston-super-Mare, which is we want extra housing, just not on this scale and not imposed on us. But the reason it's earmarked for so much expansion is because it's on the M5 and people can get to Exeter and Bristol more easily for work, or at least they could if there weren't already thousands of people trying to get to Exeter and Bristol at the moment.
Well, my honourable friend stresses the importance of infrastructure, and I think that's absolutely right. I want to mention just briefly another area of infrastructure, which is hospitals, because you would assume that the health service was involved in this process, and there was integrated thinking between the housing planning and the health service planning. The honourable gentleman was a former health minister, I believe I'm right. It wasn't. It was never a health minister, in fact. So good job I didn't say that, isn't it? But in our area, South Gloucestershire does have a major A&E department, major hospital, world-renowned French hospital, which is great, but it's being closed. And the population numbers on which that decision was taken were very, very old. So I asked North Bristol Trust how many people they assumed were going to be there when they opened the hospital, how many they'd assumed for after the day it opened, and they hadn't done any projections for after the day it opens, the new super hospital somewhere else. So I said, well, how many people do you think extra people will be there? And it's the equivalent of 250 hospital beds, short, at the start of the new super hospital. Now, are they going to revise the health plans in the light of all these housing numbers? Has the Department of Health even had a say in any of this process? The infrastructure has to be done at the same time and not be an afterthought. Simple things. We're told when we get all these new houses, we get schools and libraries and playing fields and all the rest of it. But some of the prime sites for development are playing fields. On the edge of Chipping Sodbury, we've got sports fields where 500 children play football and rugby every week, and I bet the developers fancy that as a nice prime site, lots of houses there, just near a nice market town. We can't be losing our infrastructure simply to get the houses on, because people need these open spaces. It will be criminal to lose them. Now, the final set of points I want to make, because I'm aware many other honourable members want to come in, is the whole issue of the sustainability of all of this, because alongside this document, as the Minister well knows, is a very detailed, very technical, independent sustainability assessment. I read, obviously, the full version, not the non-technical summary, I'd just like to assure honourable members. But my quotes are from the non-technical summary. Now, this is an independent and expert commentary on these plans, published on the same day. And they say this, the non-technical summary says this: there are aspects of this document that cause us significant concern. The most obvious change is the significant increase in the housing numbers planned for the region. So, by law, they have to have an assessment of this. The people who did the assessment says we're worried about it, but the document hasn't changed. I mean, they were supposed to be integrated into the process, but on the day this is published, the experts say we don't think the housing numbers are sustainable. They say this: we're worried about indirect impacts on natural and historic landscapes, such as the green belts to the east of Bristol, Biodiversity from noise, light and air pollution associated with increased population, new development and traffic. We know all of this. We didn't need sustainability experts to tell us, but where's the evidence it's been taken into account in the document? They say this: the high level of economic growth upon which the proposed changes document is based is now unlikely. Sure as heck it's unlikely. Now, given what's happening in the real world, a serious question for the Minister: what does that mean for this document? Given what we see on our news every night, do we really still want to plan for this vast level, I'm going to conclude, for this vast level of development? What is the government's thinking? I've heard honourable members who are present today say this is all scaremongering and we won't get this development because the credit crunch and the housing crash and all the rest of it, so we don't need to worry. Well, do we need to worry? Because my concern is once we zone this land for housing, that's it. Final thought, just on a local point. What about this whole sort of flooding issue, which I know will be concerned to the Honourable Member for Tewkesbury? South Gloucestershire is undertaking a strategic flood risk assessment, but it hasn't finished yet. So we're going to find out we've got land zoned for housing in flood risk areas. Is the local authority going to be able to come back and change what's in this document? Now, appallingly, the housing numbers in this document aren't a ceiling, they're a floor. The government has said that it wants to go further than this if it can, and amazingly, there's going to be a review of this, an early review, to see whether higher household projections can be accommodated. So this isn't like as bad as it might get. It all might get an awful lot worse. And I have to say, Mrs Anderson, that the people of my constituency are appalled by this entire process. They are not NIMBYs. They are not opposed to affordable housing for local need and to meet the local economic development we have, but they object profoundly to the undemocratic nature of this entire process. Many of us are going to Downing Street later to hand in thousands upon thousands of petitions to register our concerns. I simply say on behalf of my constituents to the Minister, please don't dismiss us as NIMBYs, please listen and please change this very flawed document.
Mr. Key, it's good to see you in the chair, but I'm keen to start by saying to the Honourable Lady, is that it? And I'm quite amazed that was the response from the Conservative Party there. Can I congratulate, Mr. Key, the Honourable Member for North Avon on securing this debate. He was entertaining, he was funny, engaging and passionate, and I think that's the word that I would use actually across today's debate. It has been passionate from members across all sides of the House. I have to say though, Mr. Key, I hadn't been aware that there were so many Liberal Democrat honourable members, to be honest. I'm frankly amazed at how many there are. Far too many for my liking, I would suggest. The Honourable Member for North Avon and the Honourable Gentleman for North Cornwall mentioned the idea somehow that there's been a lack of parliamentary scrutiny with regards to this whole process. I would disagree quite vehemently with that, Mr. Key. We've had a number of debates in this chamber and in the main chamber with regards to the South West Regional Spatial Strategy. The Honourable Member for North Avon himself mentioned, for example, that the RSS has been subject to debate on the 22nd of January when my Right Honourable friend, the member for Pontefract and Castleford, when she was Housing Minister. I myself have been responding for the government in respect of debates on the 7th of May, which I think was the Honourable Members for Tewkesbury's, and the 25th of June. Only this week, Mr. Key, not only have we got this important debate, but later today I'm talking about housing in Plymouth, which I think will have the RSS mentioned as well. And also tomorrow, the Honourable Member for St Ives has got a debate on housing and affordable housing and planning, I believe it's called, in which again it will be debated. I would recommend to the House as well, Mr. Key, that there are oral questions to the Department for Communities and Local Government next Tuesday. Tabling is required by tomorrow, and I would certainly welcome questions on this subject as well. So the idea that this somehow has not been subject to parliamentary scrutiny is perhaps wrong. And I would also say that in terms of when it was announced, the 12-week consultation process starting in July, that has been subject to public consultation, as quite rightly it should be. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman and then the Right Honourable Gentleman.
Mr. George.
He mentioned the debate of the 25th of June, which I secured, and in column 99, he says, and this really confirms the point which my honourable friend made earlier, he said, I hope that the honourable members will understand that because of the nature of the process, I'm constrained in what I can say at this stage. And that continued throughout this whole process. At what stage will the Minister be unconstrained? When can we have this debate? When will there ever be parliamentary scrutiny, which he says has been promised?
Mr. Ian Wright.
I'll directly respond to that point after I give way to the right honourable gentleman, but I will give due notice to the House, Mr. Key, that I'm going to disappoint again, I'm afraid, with regards to that, and the quasi-judicial nature of the process. But I give way to the right honourable gentleman.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Mr. Key, what is the point of scrutiny when the government absolutely disregards the views of those who represent the region? In this room today, we have over 20 MPs representing all parties in all parts of the region, unanimously decrying the government's strategy. What conclusion does he draw from this debate today, and what change of policy will come about as a result of it?
Minister.
Well, let me get to the very heart of my response. As the House is aware, Mr. Key, due to the quasi-judicial role of the Secretary of State in this matter, I'm very, very limited in what I can say. The House, and certainly the honourable members present here today, are aware that in taking quasi-judicial decisions under the various planning acts, there is clear guidance for ministers based on advice from the law officers and First Treasury Council. A copy of this guidance can be found on my department's website, and it's snappily titled Guidance on Propriety Issues in Handling Planning Casework in Communities and Local Government. And I'm more than happy, Mr. Key, to provide copies of this guidance to honourable members. This guidance outlines that ministers should not enter into discussions with interested parties on the changes which might be made to a draft regional spatial strategy. This is to ensure that the process is fair and transparent, and that representations to the Secretary of State are channelled through the proper statutory consultation process. So it would be entirely wrong, Mr. Key, if I said in this debate and others, well, actually, I agree with so-and-so on that particular point, and I disagree fundamentally with that approach on that point. It would be wrong because of the quasi-judicial process. Now, certainly.
I'm very grateful to the Minister. I mean, he seems to be contending on the one hand that there's been lots of parliamentary scrutiny in the debate, but on the other hand that at no point since Christmas has he been allowed to say anything. That's a funny concept of debate. But surely, to assist us in responding to the consultation, he can at least tell us what this document means. That must be allowable. And what we want to know is, does this document mean we have to say yes to the first application on the most sensitive site, or can we be sequential? Surely he can tell us what the document means so we can respond to it.
I'm going to come on to that. I'm going to try to respond as best I can and as fully as I can with regards to the 4 or 5 various points that were made. I've just mentioned process, though, Mr. Key, so it might be useful, as I have done in the past, if I can outline the process that's been used. As I have said on previous occasions, the function of regional spatial strategies is to determine, first, how much housing is needed and the general location where it should be built. Secondly, the priorities for new infrastructure and economic development. Thirdly, the strategy for protecting countryside and biodiversity. And lastly, the policy for reducing carbon emissions and safeguarding natural resources, whether that be, for example, water or minerals. As the House is aware, responsibility for the initial drafting of the strategy for the South West rested with the South West Regional Assembly. The Assembly submitted its draft to Government on the 24th of April 2006. A 12-week public consultation gave the opportunity for the public to put comments to an independent panel. The panel was appointed by the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government to test the soundness of that draft regional spatial strategy. Now, following that, an examination in public, an EIP, was held between April and July of 2007 to discuss and test the draft regional spatial strategy before the panel. The length of the EIP reflected the level of interest in this draft regional spatial strategy, with the panel reviewing comments from almost 2,000 different parties. 191 organisations and individuals took part in public hearings, which I understand were held in Exeter. The report of the panel was submitted to Government on the 10th of December 2007 and was published for information on the 10th of January 2008. It contained recommendations to the Secretary of State on all aspects of the draft regional spatial strategy. However, representations were not invited on its recommendations. Following the publication of the panel report, the recommendations contained within were considered, and proposed changes on behalf of the Secretary of State were published for consultation in July 2008. As the House is aware, we are now progressing through a further consultation period, which will end on the 24th of October 2008. What I can say to the House is the government is committed to ensuring that everyone has access to a decent home at a price that they can afford in a place where they want to live and to work. There is strong evidence to suggest that more homes are needed in the South West in order to make this possible over the next 15 to 20 years. Consequently, the proposed changes do set out higher levels of housing, and this is because, as has been mentioned by honourable members from both sides of the House, this is because the South West has a real housing issue. It is the only region, and my honourable friend, the member for Gloucester, who I pay tribute to for the excellent work that he did as Minister in the Department for Communities and Local Government. As he pointed out in his contribution, it's the only region in the country with above average house prices and below average incomes. So the independent panel concluded that over 28,000 homes would be needed each year. We considered this carefully and concluded that slightly higher increases would be needed if the region is to make real progress in tackling affordability and housing supply issues, and to ensure that housing supply is closely aligned with where the employment opportunities are likely to be. A point that I'd like to expand upon in a moment. In the light, now, and this is a key point because people have mentioned the current financial, economic and banking difficulties. In the light of these current difficulties, which are extremely turbulent and extremely traumatic, I think it's important that we need to focus on the long term as well. We have had, for the last generation or so, a huge imbalance between the demand for housing and the supply of housing. We are ageing as a population. That's not going away, regardless of current difficulties in the stock markets around the world. We need to address that through housing supply, and one of the ways that we will be able to achieve that is through the regional spatial strategy. I certainly give way.
Martin Horwood.
I'm tempted to challenge the numbers on the basis that these were in any case unreliable, as many academics and select committees have already pointed out, and that they are now profoundly out of date since they're based on growth rates of 2.8 to 3.2% over 20 years, which is clearly now fantasy. But in his closing minutes, will he please answer the question put by my honourable friend for North Avon just now, which is, in the absence of a sequential test, the impact of those numbers in a housing downturn is that developers are going straight for the greenfield sites first. What do we say at those public inquiries to developers who want to build first on the most sensitive sites?
Well, let me come to that now, and let me address that direct point. And I'm grateful to the honourable member for North Avon in providing prior notice with regards to this, because I know that it really does concern him. He'll be aware of Planning Policy Statement 3, which does actually put local authorities in the driving seat with regards to development in the area. I think all honourable members here would agree with the idea of a plan-led development system is the right approach, as opposed to some sort of short-term, ad hoc, speculative nature. Having said that, I don't think a sequential test is the right approach. The reason why I don't think it is because I think it would be rigid, it would be somewhat old-fashioned, and it would say it would be wrong to provide that site for development before that site. I think if we can be as flexible as possible, certainly in the current economic difficulties, that would be the approach to take. Now, Mr. Key, let me elaborate on that. I think the key test that needs to be established is whether a site is suitable for development. Part of that test, let me finish, part of that test is whether it is on greenbelt, which is not usually suitable, as there is a presumption, a very strict presumption in the planning system against development on greenbelt. Greenfield, which could be perhaps suitable, or brownfield, which has been for the past 10 years our preferred option. We've had a policy, a target, that 60% of all development would be on brownfield sites. We have comfortably exceeded that, and I think that is a major achievement, to something like 75% of all new development is on brownfield. That is the continuing policy of this government, something that we continue to see. I certainly give it.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way. So I know he's limited for time, but he's not even mentioned the issue of flooding, where thousands of houses are being proposed to be built in flood risk areas. The House will remember that last year in Tewkesbury, 3 people died as a result of floods. Hundreds were out of their homes for over a year, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because of the flooding. Building thousands of houses in that area is going to be disastrous.
Minister.
Well, let me come on to that very briefly. I just want to respond to the point about Greenbelt, because that was mentioned a number of times in the debate. Again, as honourable members have mentioned, we remain From the Prime Minister downwards, we remain absolutely committed to preserving, enhancing and increasing the proportion of land in this country that's accorded green belt status. Now, the Regional Spatial Strategy simply states that any partial review of the RSS should include a green belt review, with a particular view to determining whether additional land should be designated as green belt at all of the region's 3 green belts. Let me respond very quickly to the Honourable Gentleman's point about flooding, and I seem to recall a similar debate when we had this in our adjournment debate in the summer. I think we've got a very strong policy on flood protection. I think it's been increased and enhanced through Planning Policy Statement 25, and I pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Gloucester, in what he did as a minister with regards to this, but also his hard work as a constituency MP with regards to this. I think
Order. We must now move on to the next debate.